Hello, folks. There's been talk recently here on YouTube about whether or not the Zelda games that have come out recently, the more recent Zelda games, those that were not so much Link's Awakening redone, but Breath of the Wild and Tears. I don't know why people keep calling it Tears. I don't see any tears anywhere, but the kingdom is torn up. But whatever, call it Tears, I don't care, of the kingdom. Especially one being said that Tears or Tears of the Kingdom is not even all that good. And let me just start by saying that what Nintendo did with these games, they should be lauded. The fact that you have Breath of the Wild, which is a beautiful, polished video game that gives you the opportunity to do whatever you want, however you want. You can put 300 hours into that, or you could just finish it in 30 minutes. Whatever makes you feel better about yourself. And then you have the second one, however you want to pronounce the word, which gives you so many other options in just fusion alone, the game within the game. Some people called it $70 DLC, which is ridiculous, seeing as how you have 3 worlds to traverse and all these different weapons you can make, armor pieces, reactions. I mean, I've seen people make B747s. It's ridiculous what you can do with that title. So they themselves, as they are, they're tremendous games. Whether you like them or not, they're fundamentally solid, easy to pick up, difficult to master titles that do deserve a level of credit, especially that which they've already gotten. And I do appreciate how Nintendo takes even a winning formula and changes it up, does something different, which you never get from your so-called AAA titles. It may not always work out, but for the most part, they're still trying new things. And that's something that is completely strapped in pretty much the rest of the gaming industry. However, when you look at them, there's a little bit of an issue with the two of them in terms of their overall greatness, and that is they are the Legend of Zelda. And I want to say this not because I'm an old fart or because it's kind of overstating something, but the Legend of Zelda is one of the greatest gaming series, if not the greatest gaming series of all time. And it's not even one of my favorites. I mean, it's one of my top 5, but I'm more a Fire Emblem, Metroid type. And this series, which I've been playing for about 40 years since the very first one, has innovated and inspired other developers to do things that pretty much have become staples in the gaming industry, including your boy Miyazaki, Mr. Soulsborne himself, who said Ocarina of Time was the greatest game he ever played and tried to emulate that in all of his Dark Souls, Bloodborne games that you all AAA types, you PC gamers and what have you, think are the greatest games ever made. But whatever the case, The Legend of Zelda has a very basic formula. And although it has been innovated, not inspired, years in the past by Nintendo itself, it never changed the staples. And this is the issue that I have when I ask, are they good Zelda games or are they even Zelda games? When we're talking about gaming series, typically you can follow along a pattern. And although Nintendo's Zelda series does continually have that same pattern, those games find their own way of making it different. These two deviate completely from it. I don't want to hear anything about the canon or change the canon. Guys, you ever play a Zelda game? They've had about 3 or 4 Origin games since 1940. I mean, not 1940, since 1980, 40 years ago. Skyward Sword was supposed to be the beginning. What happened with that? Link to the Past was supposed to be the beginning. What happened with that? Even Ocarina of Time was supposed to be, I mean, Ganon was Ganondorf. He hadn't even transformed yet, and there you have it. They always were starting to think there's theories that there are 3 universes or whatever. I mean, who the hell knows about canon at this point? But when you look at it, simplicity. That's one of the core aspects of the Zelda series. That you have 3 tunics, red, blue, and green. You have 1 or 2 swords, maybe a Master Sword you temper a few times, and just what you need to get through the map and find things you didn't know were there. With these two titles, there really isn't any kind of simplicity in the sense that you've got tons of different pieces of gear, tons of different weapons, tons of bows, tons of this, tons of that. It's almost as if there's too much selection, and if you want, you can get 999 equipment slots to you. 999 because of all the little Korok seeds that are hanging around, all these little fuckers with their little masks carrying maraca seeds, and when you find them, you can unlock another equipment slot, whether it's a sword, shield, bow, whatever. Which kind of complicates things because how are you going to sift through that many, especially when you're under the gun trying to fight a large enemy or a big boss? Also, with this sort of choice that you have, the one thing that you don't is progression, the second aspect of a Zelda game. You see, typically the way Zelda works is you have items that you pick up in each specific area that can sort of take you to places you didn't know were there before, couldn't get to previously, like the spinner, or the ladder, or the raft, or the recorder, otherwise known as the flute, or I guess that's what you'd want to call it anyway. These now have been completely replaced by 4 abilities in each game that you get right from the onset. So when you begin, you can already throw bombs, or lift up objects that are metallic, or fuse things, or go through the ceilings to other places. Right away, you are at your peak in terms of performance or progression, and you never get anywhere other than that. You don't get any new abilities. I mean, Tears of the Kingdom sort of changed that and brought it back to the original with having the sage powers, but you can just turn them off. And aside from a couple of areas or just where you get them in the first place, you don't really need them because you have your other abilities. So that kind of kills the whole concept of the progression that was part of what made Zelda so great. Another thing, and the final thing, the third, dungeons. Oh yes, remember those? These areas would be pretty much the entirety of the game, where you would take half hour to hour and a half or even 2 hours trying to find your way through all of these different puzzles and challenges, each of which had their own specific identity later on in the series, obviously. I mean, even the original one had creatures that they were molded after, more or less. But once we get into Ocarina of Time, I would say, you have temples. And these temples can tell a story in just the architecture and topography that give you an idea as to what was going on in Hyrule. And as we got to Twilight Princess, which is my favorite Zelda game of all time, probably the greatest Zelda game of all time. I mean, you could debate that. Some people say Majora's Mask. Playing through that again, you must be psychotic. But whatever the case, every one of these areas sort of gave you an idea as to what was going on in this kingdom. And boy, some of it got pretty fucking weird. I can tell you that much. You got a better concept of all the different races in Hyrule, like the Zora or the Gorons or whatever. Zora, who originally would just attack you on sight and suddenly became, fish people. But maybe Echoes of Wisdom will kind of explain that differentiation. Whatever the case, these dungeons had their own personality, and you would get items which would lead to boss fights that were a little bit more balanced, and above all, utilized those items so that you could understand how to use them better throughout the map and in future boss fights, ultimately. And I still say that one of the reasons why Twilight Princess is my favorite and probably the best is because typically all those items that you got, you were going to use throughout the course of the game against every boss, in every area. They weren't going to just be forgotten. I always say that I love how Nintendo makes you use everything, as opposed to just introduce a mechanic and then say, all right, we don't really need it anymore. But when you look at the 2 Switch games, outside the Link's Awakening Redux, they don't really have this. I mean, you have your 4 divine beasts, but there is no differentiation outside what they look like, and they take about 20 or 30 minutes. And then, of course, you have Tears of the Kingdom here with their temples, which I mean, there is some challenge to it, but it's more or less using what other skills you already had, and not so much the abilities your sages get outside unlocking certain things. And the bosses in these specific areas, I mean, Breath of the Wild, you don't even need any items. You don't even need your skills, more or less. You just need all those arrows and those weapons you picked up. And then, of course, in Tears of the Kingdom, you do kind of need the skills, but God, those boss fights are irritating beyond anything. And that's another problem that I have with the whole concept of too many weapons at your disposal. Seeing as how I'm so used to Zelda games and their simplicity, giving me a sword and not this shattered garbage that every time I hit something, it just explodes my weapon, making it completely useless. To the point where when you do fight a boss, it's like, yo man, I've got nothing left in my equipment hold because I've used it up all on these fucking enemies everywhere, and there weren't that many enemies to begin with. The fusion concept is okay, but at the same time, it then becomes rolling the dice because you would think a silver bow coblin's horn would make it more effective than a black bow coblin's horn or crown, but it doesn't in terms of strength. And considering these things keep shattering on you, pretty much nothing you put on it does anything for durability. So ultimately what it comes down to is, though these are great games, and they are, to say they're not is a terrible disservice and just fundamentally wrong. They are great games. You might not like them for your own reasons, and that's fine. But in terms of the fundamentals, just the polish, the look, the controls, the mechanics, every aspect of these games, if they were called anything else, would be, on their own, tremendous games. But you call them The Legend of Zelda, and I'm sorry to say this, when you are at the top of the hill, there is no reason to slow down and see what everyone else is doing to emulate them. If you are a sports fan, and I used to be, now I don't give a rat's ass, but it's kind of like the Yankees with their 27 championships and 50 pennants stopping the race that they've been leading by a lot for many years and going to all these other shitty franchises. Hey, what are you guys doing wrong? Let's do that instead. You know, like when George Steinbrenner bought the franchise. Whatever the case, Nintendo, fantastic, best gaming company. You can try to argue I played every single series from every other gaming company. They just don't get it like Nintendo. These two games, great. But considering Breath of the Wild was a game I couldn't stream without getting tired for more than an hour and a half, and until I started playing Majora's Mask again, Tears of the Kingdom pissed me the fuck off in ways Zelda games never did, it's hard to say that they are good Zelda games because you set the standard. And when you do that, you have to continually charge on that peak. You make yourself the target, and you can't deviate that much. So they are great games. I would suggest them. I would play them. Maybe I'd get back into them. Maybe not. Kind of too expensive, but whatever. But to say that they're good Zelda games, that's pretty much a misnomer as to say they're not good games overall. Still would suggest them though, and let's see if Echoes of Wisdom, which looks like it's going back to the old formula with a little bit of a difference once again, does bring us the Zelda we've been looking for. Or at least I've been looking for. But thank you all for watching. I have more for you soon to come, so stay tuned, take care, and have a great day.